The restrooms are right outside and down the way to the left. We are filming the writing panel, and Jeff Harlech, the director of the Writing Center, will have that posted on the Writing Center website. So if there's parts of this that you want, I can imagine there will be some good advice that you might want to show to your students. Sometimes when they hear it from somebody besides us, it's like you're the mom, we're the mom, and when they hear it from somebody else, they believe it. So just so you know that you don't have to take copious notes, although you can if you want. And Keen Weish, our EAP coordinator, I'll introduce her a little bit later too. You probably all met her. She has your certificates, and she has the latest and greatest on the early assessment program, the Smarter Balance assessments, and how that counts for admission to the CSU. So, this has been 2 years in the making. And I know every time we ask King, so what's the latest, she would say, well, we're not sure yet. But now they're sure. So she's got that for us. And her information will be posted on her website, the EAP website. All of this is in Cal State San Marcos, so we'll be sure you have those links. And I'm going to turn it over now to Jeff.
Thank you, Pat. Yes, my name is Jeff Harlech. I'm the director of the Writing Center at Cal State San Marcos, and also the senior associate director of some of the other learning services that we have. I know several of you from having provided a couple of lectures to the ERWC courses that took place this year. Who recognizes me? Okay, all right, great. So I'm here today to sort of provide a hopefully partly culminating experience to everything that you've learned, which is to let you get a chance to see the perspective of the people that teach and help with college writing for the students that you send to our campus. So I'm going to introduce the panel to you. And unfortunately, I always have a bit of a blind spot for protocols, so I did not get full biographies from everybody. So I'm just going to introduce them as I know them. John Mitchell is a GEW instructor. Our first year writing course is General Education Writing, GEW 101. Nearly every student has to take that course, either in the first or second semester. A few people manage to wriggle out of it one way or another. To John's right is Mary Reinig, who is a new tutor in the Writing Center, and she's really here to give us the student perspective. She's only met with a couple of students so far herself as a tutor. To her right is Joan Anderson, who is a GEL instructor. That is the General Education Learning course, which is sort of the introduction to college and life that we offer also to most students. Is that approximately correct?
Right.
Okay, and of course both John and Joan have years of experience at various institutions working with students, including teaching composition. Finally, to Joan's right is Elizabeth Jafari, who is one of our tutors from beginning last semester, who has worked with several students by now. And both Mary and Elizabeth are undergraduate students themselves. So that gives you an idea of our knowledge base. And I'm going to start out by asking a couple of questions. And Pat was kind enough to give me a couple of questions too, which the panel have not heard. So I'm going to ask a couple of Pat's questions because they're positive, and then a couple of mine because they're not quite as positive. Okay. So, first of all, is give us an overview of the purpose of the CSU and Writing Center and the services it provides to students. Probably I could do that best. The Writing Center has two main constituencies. The first is the students who take the GEW course, which is up to about 1,100 or 1,200 students a semester. And the Writing Center actually originated as an arm of the Literature and Writing department, or I think it was the English department back then. And students from that course were required to meet with tutors. Today that comprises about 45 to 50% of our clientele. And the rest of the students who come to us are anybody else on campus, from freshmen through master's students, people working on their master's theses, BA papers, whatever it happens to be. So we deal with all stages of the writing process, from trying to understand the task that a person has or a prompt from an instructor, right on through brainstorming, outlining, thinking about research sources, and drafting and revising. So we do it all. And that's basically what the Writing Center does and who it does it for. So here's the question for the panel, and then I'll hand off the microphone. From the writing that you see in the center, or from the writing that you see as instructors, what are some things that writers fresh from high school do well?
Okay. Nothing. No, kidding. It's the whole spectrum of writing. Some of them, a few of them, are really very good at writing, and maybe they don't even need to be in GEW. And then at the other end of the spectrum is students who are struggling to write a sentence and can only write a paragraph when you tell them to write 2 or 3 pages. But what they do particularly well is they write summaries. And they have a notion of the 5-paragraph essay. And we try and build on the 5-paragraph essay. We make it a 10-paragraph essay. But that's one of the things they do. The other thing that they do well, I would say, is that I'm struggling here because I didn't know I was going to take a test, but is that they generally want to become better at writing, because they seem to recognize from whatever experiences they've had that writing is a valuable skill to have in college and in high school. And so they value it, and I think that's important. So those are the things I would say. And some of them have been in AP English, and some of them have been in honors English, and they have all these neat ideas about how to analyze something. And I generally disagree with them, but that's okay. That's the point of the discussion.
I would have to say that I do agree that from what I've seen so far, even though I haven't been as involved as a tutor yet, this is my first semester tutoring, the students that I've seen is they have a lot of really exciting ideas that they want to put down. It's just the organization that needs a little bit more work. The ideas that they have are creative and personal, but like I said, the organization is just what needs a little bit more work. And also being able to connect that to the prompt is also really something that I've noticed could be something that students could work on more.
I think the students bring with them enthusiasm of being in college. When the semester begins, there's this tangible feeling of, I'm here, I'm excited about it. They kind of have stars in their eyes until about midterm. And then the reality hits about how much work they have to do. But they seem to approach, in the beginning, their assignments well. They attempt to do what you want them to do. And if it doesn't quite measure up, they're very disappointed in themselves, because the difference between high school writing and college writing is something that they have to get used to. And we have to kind of capture that enthusiasm and help them understand what it is we're after and to find their academic voice.
I've been working with a lot of students in the past semester and even these few weeks of the new semester. And I would say summary is definitely one of the things that they can do well. They have great ideas, and it's all about figuring out how to translate that into an academic sense. Because they can tell me an idea and go off about it as if they're talking to a friend, but it's where we need to take that idea that is really good and put it into an academic language. I would also say they do have a lot of enthusiasm, and they'll just go ahead and go for the assignment without really reading the prompt. And there's also an issue of like a lack of confidence in the students that I've seen, that they can do it, but they don't think that they can. So I think just building on that, their confidence is something that they need to work on.
I'll come over there. Thank you. Okay, so the idea is that we're asking a couple of questions to warm everybody up and give you a chance to finish eating, and then we are opening the floor to all of you to ask questions. I don't know if do we have a microphone for that? You'll have to yell.
Or Jim, you can repeat the question.
I will repeat the question. And I have a small inventory of questions in case there's a momentary lull. But we, of course, want to hear primarily from you. All right, so here are a couple of questions that I thought of asking that I gave to the panel in advance. And a little bit of this was just touched on. What kinds of writing anxieties do first-year writers express to you as a tutor or as an instructor? And you are not all obligated to answer every question, but if you would like to, please let me know. I'll hand the microphone over. So, what kinds of writing anxieties do first-year students express to you?
Some anxieties are just the terminologies that are used in the prompts, like analyze and make a thesis statement. For some students, they seem like really big, scary words, and then it's just a matter of having to work with them and break it down so that they can understand that it's not this, I don't know how to describe it, like this unicorn, you know, that it is something that they can do and that they already know how to do.
Anyone else?
Some of the anxieties I've seen are students being confronted with an entire page of directions from their teachers. And then they sit there and they read it over and over again, and they're not too sure just what they're supposed to do. And sometimes we have to start with, okay, may I see the prompt? And so they log into Cougar Courses, which is our version of Blackboard. And then we sit there and we look at the prompt and go through, okay, the teacher wants this, the teacher wants this, the teacher, oh, I get it. And then they start coming up with some ideas. So the directions are a lot more complicated for them. And I agree that words like analyze, discuss, explain, those are things that they really need to know, before they get to us.
Well, when I first came into college and I had my 4 classes and every teacher told me that the final paper was going to be 10 pages, I had never been confronted with such an assignment. I think the most I'd written in high school was a 3-page paper, and then I did go to attend a high school in Texas where we learned about databases and how to research and things, where my mom seriously helped me with that 10-page paper. So learning to write a lot of information and take that information and put it into so many pages was a really big anxiety for me. But once I learned that there was so much information out there that you could learn by using your resources like the databases and articles and newspapers and magazines, and knowing which of those sources are credible, that really helped me with realizing, oh my gosh, there's so much information that I can put. This 10 pages is going to be no problem. So I would prepare students that you're going to write 10 pages or more for the rest of their college career.
I would say that the 2 most clear anxieties I get are I hate to write and I'm not good at writing. And that's how they feel and believe, and it's hard to go forward from that point. But that's the whole purpose of the GEW program, is to develop some confidence in their writing, confidence in their voice. And again, the other one, just to follow up on, would be being able to do as much writing as is required. And when they see the end requirement in GEW is generally a research paper of 10 to 12 pages with X number of outside references. And so that I probably personally am responsible for creating a lot of anxiety, because I make them write every single class. They have to bring a writing assignment with them based on a reading assignment. So they learn to write twice a week. And they're serious 2 or 3 page essays every time. So that for many of the students, the amount of writing that they get handed to the first day of class is absolutely terrifying. Not my intent, but that's where they have to be at the end, so we might as well start at that point. And they figure it out. They truly do.
They have to start out being terrified? Is that what you meant?
No, that they terrified. It's a good strategy. You have their attention.
All right, let me ask this question. What makes it difficult for students to accurately, no, sorry, not the one I want to ask. Do students have difficulty adjusting to the multiple writing expectations of their various professors and instructors, and what do you think might be done about that, either during their time in college or their time before? So as you know, you all went through this, that every professor has a different set of expectations, you have different genre conventions, and a lot of different notions of what good grammar and writing are. And you have to do what each person says. So of course that requires some adaptability. So what might we be able to offer as a way of helping with that?
That's one thing I try and emphasize is, although we're a strict MLA department and that's what they have to follow, and one of the complaints I brought with them, I asked my students today what complaints I should bring to you about what they didn't or did learn in high school. And there were very few, by the way, but one of them was, make sure you tell them that APA is way more important than MLA. Because apparently the other departments push APA. So I would say one of the adjustments that they have is adjusting to different formats in different situations. And the other adjustment they have is, at least from my point of view, I don't think the faculty has a lot of communication across departments. And so I don't necessarily know what the requirements are in another class. And so I might be dumping a lot of assignments on them about the same time other people are doing that to them. So that obviously causes problems. But in general, what I try and emphasize is this notion of a rhetorical situation where you have to figure out what's being asked of you and then develop a strategy that works for that situation. So we talk a lot about analyzing the rhetorical strategy, analyzing the rhetorical situation. So those two meet somehow. And the best place they meet is where they start at the 5-paragraph essay. That always works, even if it's a 10-paragraph essay or a 20-paragraph essay. But giving them a strategy that's going to work most of the time, I think, is important.
I would definitely have to go off of that and say that I've never written an MLA since I've been in college, and I've only used APA. My major is communication, and I would also have to say that another thing, like he said, outlining is a really important thing. Being able to take the bigger theme or the bigger picture of what you're trying to persuade or inform about, and then break it up into smaller main ideas that flow into a nice paper that can be 10 pages. And another thing, although some professors have different preferences of writing styles, one thing that is going to be across the board that they're going to be looking for is that academic vocabulary, and making sure that, instead of writing things the way you would speak it, like, I'm looking to get an education, you would rather say I'm seeking to receive an education, and just making sure that they know those tiny differences is really important when you're thinking about academic writing versus just speaking your thoughts.
It would be helpful if the students knew about the university writing requirement in all the classes on our campus. We have, every class is required to generate a certain number of words. I think it's 1,500, and that includes math and science. And if they know that, they'll be expecting teachers to generate writing in journals, written assignments, all sorts of writing tasks, word problems if it's math. That is something that we cover in the first year seminar, the General Education Lifelong Learning class, as we introduce them to the idea that every professor is going to want a certain way of producing a product from them. And we give them examples of it and give them skills for how to deal with everything, including the APA versus the MLA. We send them to the library, and the librarians require them to use the APA to do the library module. They have it for 2 weeks. And many of us require in our written projects that they use MLA for us, but yet APA for the librarian. So they get a taste of that
every professor has a different way that they want you to write it, whether they want you to follow their version of the MLA format or not. And I think students need to be adaptable and not get stuck in, well, I learned this way in high school, so like his way is wrong and I'm just going to write it the way that I learned it in high school. And I think they just need to learn to be more adapting, yes. Also, just being open to getting critiqued rather than them feeling like their professor hates them, you know? Because I've had that a few times.
That's very useful. So I think we have some questions welling up.
I just had a question to clarify. You stated that each class has a minimum requirement of 1,500 words. Is that per assignment or for the semester?
Semester.
Per semester.
It's actually 2,500 words, so
Is
it's
it?
even more daunting than it
Oh,
sounds.
okay.
Yeah, but it can be in any format or any number of discrete assignments, but yes.
But, I mean, that's varies. In the GEW, there isn't a requirement, I don't know what it is offhand, but it's, I don't know, let's say it's 30 pages of double-spaced writing is roughly what it comes out to be. And probably 200 pages of reading, although that's a minimum and nobody does the minimum, right?
Some questions? Yes.
Is there any trend that you see in your strong writers where you ask them, how did you learn to construct such a well-organized essay? And they say, I learned X and Y in high school.
So are there any, I was doing dichotic listening there. Yes, what do our strong writers say they learned that makes them strong?
Are there any commonalities among your strong writers?
So are there any commonalities among our strong writers?
I would say the students that had the AP English come with a different skill set than those that did not.
Yes.
And they approach whatever you ask them to do as a writing task, with confidence. And they have the idea they already know how to do it. So I definitely see that.
I would also say that's true, and also honors English, if any of you are using honors English, or the same techniques that you could apply in any English. The other thing that I would say is common for good writers is that they read a lot. I mean, there's no way you don't succeed at writing if you don't read. I mean, you can't break that connection. But those are the two things. And the other thing I say, good writers, they've done some serious writing in high school. They've written and they've gotten some valuable feedback. They've heard when they're doing well and when they're not doing so well.
And we don't mean to imply that strong writers would not say that they gained that strength from the ERWC course that they took. It's just that, of course, is not as thoroughgoing throughout the school systems yet as other types of courses. So I'm sure that in the future we will be hearing more good students saying that they took the course that you are all teaching. Another question? Yes, sir.
Are you experiencing problems with sentence length and sentence variation when you're reading or writing?
Are we experiencing, sorry, go ahead.
Sentence variation.
Are we experiencing trouble with sentence variation and sentence length in the students' writing?
I kind of think that's a little bit of a hard question to ask because everybody is different. There are some people that, even though they're writing in more conversational type of a way, they have the sentence variations and they have the length there. I would just say the organization of the sentences is a little bit lacking, not necessarily lengths or variations. It's like grammatical things. Like, I don't know if there's the Spanish speaker that puts the adjective after the subject instead of before, like the blue book, they'll put the book blue, you know, just something like that. So I think it's just more grammatical issues.
Something I would say about sentence length is run-on sentences. Yeah, run-on sentences. I've really only tutored a couple kids in the past week or so, and that's something I noticed the most. Was you're allowed to split an idea into 2 sentences, and you don't need to overuse the semicolon. And another thing I would also say is being able to properly use direct quotes from your sources. So sometimes it seems like, well, I know I used to do this a lot. Is I wouldn't know how to put a direct quote into my sentence and use it. According to Smith, comma, this is defined as, and then being able to make that flow rather than just taking literally the definition out of the book. Understanding that it still needs to sound like a fluid sentence and not choppy. Those are the 2 main things I would say about sentence length. What did you mean specifically by sentence variation?
Well, just on a couple different levels. One being in the classroom, and another being helping kids with SAT. Figuring out SAT. Essay specifically, one of the things you're looking for is, do you have any knowledge of sentence variation? Are you using a simple sentence over and over and over again? Or are you creating complex sentences with complex ideas? And I was wondering, are you seeing that being used, that complex sentence, complex idea, in our freshmen, or are they still in that little box? They haven't quite broken it. Can you repeat the question first?
So the follow-on to that question was whether or not students use different types of sentences, or including complex and compound sentences, or if they were simply using simple subject, verb, object sentences repeatedly. Do you want to respond to that?
There's a lot of simple sentences, and I think that's just from going from high school to college and then needing to actually expand on the idea in the sentence rather than it made me feel sad. Why did it make me feel sad? So I would say there's a lot of simple sentences. For complex sentences, they end up being run-on sentences that you need to scale back and maybe have a grammar talk with them. But yeah.
It's helpful to be able to use the software too, to set it up to do more than just grammar check, but do grammar and style. When you use Word and make sure that everything is check marked, and sit there with them and explain what's wrong. I tutor the EFL students, and several of them have told me this last week that no one has ever done that with them before. And they really learned something that they hadn't learned, and they maybe had been in college for 4 years. So, that's helpful. And I was shocked how many people don't really know how to use that program to do that. And we have it on all of our machines, all of our PCs on campus. They just have to configure the software to do it. And if they would just screen their writing with that, it covers so much. It even gives you writing level. And it's a very valuable skill for proofreading.
I think sentences are important, but I think their writing style is also important. And so they come with a writing style. And so you want to encourage their own writing style. And if they tend to write short sentences, I'm on the kind of liberal spectrum of the writing instructors. But I do agree that some students, and it seems to be a particular problem, there's a few students who write endlessly long sentences, and it's like they don't know what a sentence is. And then there's other students who write brief, short sentences, and they don't really ever get around to telling you what they're talking about in the sentence that they write. So it's kind of a combination of teaching them some basic grammar, but also teaching them what they're trying to accomplish with a sentence. They're trying to explain something. And sometimes you need to use more words. I frequently write that comment on papers, use more words. I mean, it sounds silly, but my comments are pretty basic.
Yes. I'm agreeing with mint green or whatever
I
lemon
just
is?
was wondering, we have at our school pretty much, especially in for juniors and seniors, everything is submitted electronically. Everything. Google Docs, Google Classroom, which has some challenges because a lot of the kids will type something on their phone and throw it at you. But is that what is expected of them in college? Everything is pretty much submitted electronically, or are they? I mean, it's almost like some of these kids don't know how to write anymore because everything we have them do in front of a Chromebook.
So the question is whether all writing is to be submitted electronically at the university.
Depends on the professor, but from the classes that I've been in, I've had a combination of it needs to be handwritten, it needs to be a hard copy, no turning it in, or it just submitted electronically. So it's pretty much everything.
Like we're telling them, like, yep, this is what you gotta do. This is how everybody does it.
Well-
But I don't know.
It's moving more towards like mostly electronically, but I've just been faced with having to do either my essay handwritten and turned in, or just the hard copy as well.
Well, as faculty, we do have turnitin.com. It's automatically available to us, and many of us use that either for final papers. Personally, I use it for the rough draft and have the students look at it and make a revision for me. And I do use the courseware to have documents uploaded that way. But I use hard copy also in peer review in class. So it's a combination of things.
It's definitely always going to be typed. Like she said before, it's a combination for me. I have some professors who prefer it to be printed out in hard copy, and then some professors will only accept it electronically, but it's always typed.
Yes, I certainly expect them to be able to type, but they turn it in during the course of the semester in two different ways. They turn it in online electronically, but they also sometimes bring a hard copy. And by the way, they hate it. Why do they hate it? Because they have to pay to print it. So they email it to you and let you print it. But they also do in-class writing, not just in a GEW, where they have to write an essay, for example, in an essay test, and they have to handwrite it. But I think people who grade those kind of things are crazy. But
Saintly. They're saintly. They're not crazy. Okay. Yes. Yes.
My question kind of follows up on the in-class writing. As professors, on a widespread, do you feel like there is a lot of on-demand writing? Is it just predominantly in like midterms and finals, or is that a reoccurring practice in class meetings?
So the question is whether there is a certain amount of on-demand writing on campus that may or may not be restricted to midterm and final essay and short answers. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I'm going to let everybody take a crack at it.
Well, some of us are using wicker strategies. You probably remember that from Avid. And so we use journaling, which requires them to write to a prompt in the class and turn it in. Very often those prompts are pre-writing to bigger assignments. And the librarians use writing in class too when they do the library module for the GEO course. And they actually have to do it right there in the class, and it's turned in electronically. And some of them are homework assignments that they have to do electronically also.
Could you tell us what the
Wicker strategies from the Avid program. We have Avid for higher ed. Yeah.
What does it stand for?
Writing,
Writing.
inquiry, collaboration, organization, and reading. And that's, what some of us put on our syllabi, that's what we do. We don't call it Avid, we just call it Wicker strategies. Did you?
Again, I want to make it really clear, I'm not speaking for the GEW program, but in my writing class, they write in class almost every class session. And I used to use journals, now I change it to notebooks. But, so if I'll ask a discussion question and nobody feels like discussing, then they write the answer. And then we discuss. but they do write in class, and I think it's a standard strategy in GEW to write during class. Now they keep this notebook, and I'm one of the portfolio people who I think they should collect all of their writing during the semester, and so their writing notebook is part of their portfolio, and I do look at it. And what amazes me about them is when I tell them to write something, they all write. I mean, they will sit there for 10 or 15 minutes and write. It's astounding. But if I give them a paper to write out of class, 20% of them will come back with no paper. It's the same assignment. I don't get it. If you want to explain it to me, I'm open to that explanation.
I think at the upper levels, probably most writing is assignment-based and not on demand, because most professors are still lecturing most of the time. Yes?
Well, in the ERWC, I've noticed like we're really refocusing our curriculum on expository writing as opposed to analyzing literature. And I was wondering how much more we should go in that direction, really minimizing the literature and maximizing expository writing analysis. If you think that as English teachers we should continue to move in that direction in high school.
The question is whether in the ERWC class, teachers should be moving even further away on the continuum from literary analysis towards expository writing. And I would like to answer that first, if that's okay. I would say go off the chart, okay? I mean, if you really want to think about what kind of writing people do in college, it's not just expository per se, but it's much more that than it is rhetorical analysis or literary analysis. I'm sorry to have to say that, but if you were willing to go out to the outer reaches, I would say that the students would reap the reward at college.
I would agree with Jeff as much as it hurts me because I am a literature major. I would say that for the majority of the GEW students that we do get, their first assignment is to do some sort of a rhetorical analysis. So I'd say please mention it at some point so that they have an idea. But just, definitely go away from literary analysis and see what they can do from that, because I think a lot of the other majors don't do rhetorical things. They mainly just analyze data, and so, yeah.
Is this
a conflict question, which doesn't need to be answered here, but the students you said tend to do very well in the writing course, and the students that are not required to take it because they've passed their AP test with 4 or 5, they're doing almost all rhetorical analysis and literary analysis. So I see that as a conflict, because we teach it as, you gotta learn how to think, because who cares if you write if you don't have anything worth saying? And we're dealing with 15 and 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. So I just think that's an interesting conflict in the comments.
You're right. Well, I also would have something to say about that, but I'll let other people.
Rhetoric and literary analysis.
Does anybody have a thought about that?
One of the way we approach it in GEW is we basically do both. We do a literary analysis part, and we do, I don't even know what the other name for the other stuff is. In my head, it's all rhetorical analysis. I don't care if you're writing a report for a science journal. I don't care if you're writing a CEO's report or an executive summary, whatever. You still have to think about the audience. You still have to think about your purpose, and you have to identify what are the key features that you're trying to communicate. So, and the other thing I would add to that is I've read some really great papers that don't say anything. Those are the most difficult papers to respond to, because students get angry when you tell them it's not a very good paper, because it doesn't say anything. Even though it has nice paragraphs, it has nice transitions, it's really well organized, the language is great, but if it doesn't say anything, if there's no substance there, it's not writing, it's typing practice. in my world.
For students, definitely what you're saying, like, they need to write for a point and not just write for the sake of writing. Like, but I see with a lot of the literary analysis that we end up having to go through and revise is that they'll just make the summaries of them and they think that they're analyzing it. Or if they're doing a psychology paper and they have data that they need to put in there and they have to analyze it, but they don't come to some sort of a conclusion. So I think they need to really focus on how to develop their purpose in the paper. And it doesn't matter what kind of writing, whether it's literary or mostly just research-based, you need to make a point. And I don't think that they are being trained enough in that department of making a point and having your information lead up to a point.
I've seen several assignments from different courses using Aristotle's appeals, and that's come through with work on critical thinking. And I thought that was interesting. It's not just in Philosophy 110, it's in other courses too, and they have to figure out the appeal and discuss it in an essay format. And they might be analyzing writing, they might be analyzing film, but they have to compare and contrast and deal with those appeals.
A lot of the writing that I've done personally involves taking, learning the concept first in our textbooks or theories, and then being able to apply that to answer the prompt that is being presented to us. So I think it really, through college, it's a little bit of both. It's rhetorical analysis and literary analysis, but definitely just being able to read the prompt and then have thoughts in response to the prompt, and that all connect to one another is important in being able to organize those thoughts. But there's a lot of analysis, exactly, and being able to take a concept and analyze that concept and then persuade or inform in a proper way.
So there isn't necessarily, a conundrum there. A good, deep writing course will create nimble students who are adaptable to different expectations, who do apply critical thinking. And there's no question that being able to analyze your audience, your message, your medium for providing the message, those will stand you in good stead all the way, in whatever kind of writing you're doing. My personal thought is, to me, the archetypal, the typical, prototypical college paper is a research paper, where you are trying to advance a point of view which is not your opinion. And this is a very difficult distinction for students to make. It is your reasoned judgment. I think I mentioned this before, that one of our professors on the videos that I have on my website discusses this at some length. It is your informed notion about what the correct answer to something is, or the proper way of analyzing or describing something is, based on your ability to absorb and synthesize what other people have said. At the end of the day, what you personally think is pretty irrelevant in most classes. But after a while, not necessarily in the first or even the second year, but that transition has to be made. So I guess what I would say is, why not just start with that kind of writing at the very beginning? So why insist or hope that the student will be able to apply the principles that you've taught them to a kind of writing that is going to be relatively foreign for them? But that's just my personal opinion. But there really is no reason to think that there's some kind of a conflict there. Or what's your tent is not up? Yes. Yeah. Oh, Jeff. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Jeff, for your question.
One is, so from what I've heard, John and Mary?
Joan, Elizabeth, Mary, John.
Okay, Elizabeth talked about is that students have difficulties with getting to the point of the significance of what they're writing. And so it seems to me that if they are writing with a detached, like rational point of view that if it's not personalized, it's going to be difficult for them to connect to why what they're writing is significant. And then my second point is I would like to ask, what do you think students' abilities are with revision? Do you feel like they come prepared with the skills or the abilities to revise their writing? Or are they writing into that before?
So the second part of the question is, do students have revision abilities? The first part, let me see if I got this straight, was that there's a risk that if you don't begin with a more individual-based kind of writing, that the students will be detached from the significance of what they're writing. Is that basically?
Yeah, so like using a model like an axis paragraph, the S is for significance, so when they get to the point of why what they're writing matters or why the evidence that they're using and the analysis that they're using is important, not only to the paper, but let's say that if they're using if they're expanding out to why it's significant to humanity, to the world, or something like that. If there's not a personal element there, how do they make that claim of their argument?
So how can students make a claim of significance without a personal element or personal connection to what they're saying?
I think that's difficult for the students to do. But I think the first step in that, or at least the step I emphasize, is the notion of interpretation, where when they use a quote, the next thing they need to do is interpret it. Put the quote in their own words, but in, as we said earlier, in academic language. So that's where their personal significance starts to come in, because they start to try and make an understanding of what that quote means to them. But I think it's a tricky issue. We're also trying to move them away from their personal point of view. I get that you're trying to do that because they frequently ask me, am I allowed to use I? And they are, by the way, at least in my class. But, I mean, making them subjective and objective at the same time is complicated. But that's what you're going towards. And so I think if they get out of balance, that's okay, because then they're trying. But if they're only subjective, then you're not helping them. If they're only objective, then you're not helping them, because they're not figuring out the meaning themselves. They're not making part of their knowledge, their experience.
I believe you had a second part to the thing about the revision.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, we'll get the students that will do it 30 minutes before it's due. But things happen, and so it's but I think the thing that I mainly see a problem with is that they don't know how to proofread their work. Once it's done and they've written the minimum requirement, they're like, all right, I'm good, I can turn it in, when that's really not the case. They really need to go back through and maybe even read it out loud to themselves. And a lot of them think it's silly, but then when they actually start reading it out loud, they're like, wow, I made a lot of mistakes here, or that's not exactly how I wanted this sentence to sound. So I don't think they have those revision skills quite down.
When they use the software to revise, they may not understand some of the comments on how to fix the problem. The software may flag something, and then well, what's that? And then when I sit with them, one of the things is passive voice that pops up. How do you fix that? What is it? Never heard of it. So we sit there and rearrange sentence, and they get it then. So it just depends on how much revision they've had to do in the past. My way of explaining it is to say revision means change. And it means more than just putting a comma in here and a semicolon there. It means physically changing the text to make it better, and give them some examples.
Yeah, I definitely can't stress enough how important it is to proofread and encourage students to proofread, because I used to think like that too. Oh, I can just type up one draft and it's good to go, it's good to send in. But it becomes such a better paper for not only for your professor or your audience to read, but I mean, you feel better about your paper and you feel good about getting your points across like the way you want to interpret them and the way you want to communicate them. So, I mean, I proofread my papers constantly, over and over. I'll write a sentence out, and I'll go back and read the sentence. So free writing is also really helpful, but then just making sure that you can go back and spend plenty of time before the assignment's due.
Just to finish on revision, so we teach from the writing process, and the revision is one of the important steps. As a matter of fact, you do it more than once. But a lot of students aren't in that habit, and because they're in college, they'll say, okay, I'm going to go to the library at noon because my class is at 3, and I'm going to write that paper and be done with it. And that never happens, right? It never happens. And some of them never learn that it never happens, but most of them do. So one of the things I do is before they turn in a paper, they bring it to class. That's why I use hard copies. I make them read it, and I allow them to make any changes they want while they're reading the paper in class, and that seems to help. But I don't know how you make it valuable to them, but writing is only revision. Most of us have only written one paper. We just revise it endlessly in different ways. I mean, that's basically what we do. But I don't know, let's see, what else can I say? I just want to say that if you teach them nothing else about revision, if you convince them that revision is valuable, you have given them an incredible gift.
Let me also make a comment there. Understanding revision means understanding that there is variation in the way that things can be expressed. So I think in that area, the Erwc curriculum is strong because it does give them the tools to think about what are the parameters along which something can be said differently. So if you don't have a concept, and this is what I think I have noticed in most of the students I've worked with, if you don't have a concept that what came out of your hand or your brain is a definitive and unique and sole way of expressing something, you will not be inclined to revise. But if you recognize that, oh, this may not be intelligible to my reader based on what the reader knows, the way I've expressed it, or this is not riveting in a way that it might be, or just that the language is confused, then all right, I lost my own train of thought there. You either will or won't. If you don't recognize those things, you will neither be able to revise nor have an inclination to revise. And if you do, you will. And so that is a valuable component of teaching students to strategize rhetorically. And I think that's a thing that it does very well. But you're right, most students don't revise, and when they do revise, they don't do anything because they don't have this concept that something could be expressed a different way. I'd be curious. I mean, I test that out among your students. That would be my main expectation. Okay, so yes, you want to?
I want to continue with revision because it's really important. Okay, so you give them some comments on the paper. Then what happens? The paper goes in their notebook. No, the next step is they make the revisions. They respond to your comments. That's important. You make them do that. I make them do it in class, during class. They make those revisions, and I walk around and I check. Because they hate to revise. I already wrote this paper. I'm done with this paper. I'm never going to write that paper again. Bad idea. Okay, revise, revise, revise. I mean, and you have to follow up on it, always. Because if you don't make them, if they get to ignore your comments, they get in the habit of doing that. And then they don't pay any attention to them.
That's true. Yes. Yes, sir.
I hate to stay on this same topic. If people want to move on, but I just have a quick question for the tutors since you guys are a little bit closer to this. It sounds like a a lot of the things you're saying is that kids have no idea how to revise, and I'm just kind of thinking to myself about the number of times that I've done that in class, and done peer editing, and done councils with kids on my own, and done group editing, and done whole class. So I'm just wondering, did you guys get that in high school, and it just clicked in college, or you didn't get it, and then suddenly it was like, oh, I need to be doing this?
Okay, so the question directed to our current students on the panel is whether or not they learned how to revise, because the gentleman is talking about the great amount of time and attention that he devotes to that. And so did you, sorry?
A lot of effort, not always success.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, there's also the cognitive development stage that the students are at. I mean, none of this is about you, right? Anything, right? It's
I was just really curious.
Yeah, so the question is, did you learn how to revise? Did that take with you, or was that something you had to develop over time? Let's start with Mary, okay? She's closer to me.
Well, like I said earlier, when I was in high school, the most I ever wrote was a 3-page paper, probably. So that was the first problem. I don't know what the requirements are now, but that was an issue because once I got to college, I was not prepared to write at all, and so I do recall having a lot of group assignments and group work, and that was helpful. But it did definitely, there was something about college that it helped me click. But I think the main thing is just getting the students to write longer papers and being able to really, really accentuate your points and articulate your points detailedly, and literally doing the work for your audience almost, rather than assuming that your audience is just going to pick up on what you're trying to convey in your paper. And that's something that clicked in college for me. Is it's okay to go into detail. It's okay to have both simple and complex sentences, but you need to integrate both and be able to just communicate your thoughts really thoroughly.
So I was definitely not taught how to revise my paper in high school. I wasn't an AP student, and I just took the regular English classes. And what I would see with my friends that were in the AP program was that they would get the feedback, and for me, I would actually have to go to my teacher and ask, well, why did I get a C on this paper? Because there was no comments, there was just a grade on it. And so for me, I had to just sort of have the agency to do it myself, for me wanting to learn how to be a better student. So I think it depends on the teacher and how much they actually care. And it is really nice to know that there are teachers that care, that want to help their students learn how to revise, and not just at the AP level, So for me, I was never taught. I had to go and figure that one out on my own.
And another thing to say about that is also going over it personally with students has been really helpful. When I would go into my professor's office hours and sit down with them one-on-one, and they would be able to explain to me why I didn't explain a thought thoroughly, or why the grammar was wrong, or why I could have used a better academic vocabulary throughout my paper. The one-on-one really helps in the explanation of why the first one was incorrect and why the new one is correct. So, and the peer editing too is helpful for me because it really helps you get an idea of what students are thinking, like students who think like you, and helps you kind of ease the fear of turning your paper into your professor first. So.
And I'd like to just say that both Elizabeth and Mary learned how to write very well, using a lot of personal motivation, because I don't hire people that can't, first of all, write very well. And it's hard for me to find people like that. So in addition to their qualities of compassion and supportiveness and the ability to explain, they both write very well. So they deserve credit for having contributed to a lot of that themselves, apparently. All right, I'm afraid that we have to stop. So I'm getting the chop. I'm sorry you didn't all get a chance to answer the question, but I appreciate your involvement, and I hope it was useful for you today. I'd like to thank our panelists for giving many candid answers. So again, from the far end, Elizabeth Jafari, Joan Anderson, Mary Reining, and John Mitchell. Thank you very much.
And I'll just echo that. Thank you very much for your time, because we know that you've been working all day, and here you are just like us at night. So we really do appreciate your words of wisdom. And this I'll say for us to all think about. We know students need to write more, and we know they need to write longer papers, and we've got 180 kids. And so it's, or more. So that it's a huge, I'm like, don't you dare write more than 3 pages. I can't grade it all. So I think we maybe need to come up with some ways, think about ways that we can get more feedback, maybe from, other places besides just us. And wouldn't it be nice if we could get our colleagues in their content areas to have kids write more too? Yeah. Because they do it at the university. So the more kids write, the better they're going to be at it. And if they wrote all day, boy, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Okay, we're going to take about a 5-minute break, go to the restroom. Please get more food. There's coffee, cookies, and then we'll have our EAP.
I might still. Well, I'm in there for a huge block of hours.
Thank you so much.